My name is Barbara Mitchell. I am 73 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that family is the most valuable thing we have. That blood ties are unbreakable. I was so naive. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of how my granddaughter's education fund turned into the fund for my personal ruin. How I, an elderly woman, was left with nothing and found the strength not just to survive, but to be reborn. This is a story about cruel betrayal, about the battle for justice, and about how high the price of truth can be. And before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? My story took place in Boston, but what city or country are you in right now? Be sure to write in the comments. I would be very interested to know that there are people all over the world who understand me. Boston, 10 years ago. I remember how the sunlight fell on the polished tabletop in Mr. Davidson's office that day. It played in glints on his gold watch and on the rim of my porcelain cup of tea, which I hardly touched. I had a lump in my throat, a mixture of excitement and that aching sadness that always accompanies important decisions related to the memory of Martin. Mr. Davidson pushed the stack of documents away from him and smiled his calm, professional smile.
Everything is ready, Mrs. Mitchell. The foundation has been established. $250,000. As you requested, for Alice's education.
I nodded, clutching my handbag, the very one Martin had given me on our last anniversary. Thank you, Arthur. I want her to have every opportunity. I don't want her to have to deny herself anything.
That's very generous of you. And wise. Are you sure you want to transfer control to Carol and Robert? We can appoint an independent trustee. It's standard practice.
I remember shaking my head then. No, I didn't want any standard practices. I wanted family. Trust. Carol is my daughter. And Robert, he works in finance. He understands it better than I do. I don't want Alice to feel like some soulless bank official is watching over her future. Let it be a family affair. Oh, my naive belief in family affairs. How wrong I was then, covering up my fear and unwillingness to delve into boring numbers with beautiful words about trust. Having worked side by side with medical geniuses for half a century, always respecting professionalism, at the most important moment of my life I chose to trust everything to amateurs. Because they were flesh of my flesh. I left Davidson's with a sense of duty fulfilled. The air was cool and autumnal, but inside me burned a small flame, a flame of hope that I was doing for Alice what Martin would have done for her if he were alive. He adored our granddaughter with the unconditional, tender love that only grandfathers are capable of. Sometimes I think that this foundation was my way of continuing that love, the material embodiment of my grandfather's dream. That same evening, I called Carol. Honey, everything is ready. The foundation is set up. Her voice sounded sincere, I remember. Or did I want to believe that?
Oh, Mom, that's wonderful. Don't worry about anything. Robert will take care of everything. Alice will be so happy.
I hung up the phone and walked over to the large window in my living room. Below, the lights of the city that had been my home all my life were coming on. I felt calm. I had done the right thing. I had secured my granddaughter's future. I had reached out to my daughter, showing her that I trusted her with what was most precious to me. I didn't know then that at that very moment I wasn't laying the foundation for Alice's bright future. I was laying the first brick in the fragile world I had left after Martin. And that very generosity that warmed me then would turn against me with a cruel, sharp blade of betrayal. The first transfers became a strange ritual for me, almost a celebration. Every check I wrote seemed not just a waste of money, but a brick in the foundation of Elisa's bright future. I felt not just like a grandmother, but a benefactor, an architect of destiny. I remember the first large transfer, $15,000, for tutors to prepare for admission to the Academy of St. Mary. Carol explained to me on the phone with a slight note of panic in her voice.
Mom, without this, she has no chance. The competition is fierce, and we need to make it before the deadline.
I didn't hesitate for a second. Sitting at Martin's dark oak desk, I wrote the check with a deep sense of satisfaction. I imagined my clever granddaughter, Alice, sitting in the bright classrooms of a prestigious school, and my heart filled with pride. A few months later, a new request followed, $10,000 for a summer science program at Stanford for gifted children. Robert came to me personally to pick up the check. He was wearing his best business suit and smelled of expensive perfume.
Barbara, you have no idea what an opportunity this is for Alice. It's not just a vacation. It's an investment in her resume. Things like this open doors to the best universities.
I nodded, looking at him over my glasses. The main thing is that she finds it interesting, I said. He smiled his wide, perfect smile.
Oh, rest assured. She's thrilled.
And I believed him. Oh, how I believed him. I believed every word they said because I wanted to believe. Because I saw the result. My Alice really did study at St. Mary's Academy. She would come to see me on Sundays in her fancy pleated skirts and white blouses, with a slight sparkle in her eyes and a mature seriousness. She would tell me about her projects, her chemistry experiments, the books they were reading.
Granny, did you know that DNA can be extracted from strawberries? We did it in the lab.
I listened to her with bated breath and mentally thanked Carol and Robert. Of course, schools like this, opportunities like this, they cost money. A lot of money. But how could I complain when I saw the sparkle in my granddaughter's eyes? In those days, I was just Granny. The beloved Granny who baked ginger cookies, let them watch old movies until midnight, and never asked about their grades unless Alice wanted to tell me. The money from the fund was an invisible magic wand that made her life better, and I got my reward, her laughter, her hugs, her trusting head on my shoulder. I didn't see the signs then. I didn't think much of Robert's new car, a big black Lexus he bought right after Alice was accepted into the academy. It's necessary for work, Barbara, he explained. We have to keep up appearances. I didn't connect their sudden week-long trip to Mexico with my transfer to educational materials and laboratory equipment. It seemed to me that they were just working hard and finally allowing themselves a little joy. I was blind. Willingly and happily blind. I built castles in the air from their words and my faith, not suspecting that the foundation beneath them was not granite, but lies. And that very soon, not even dust would remain of these castles. The years flowed like water in the Charles River, slowly but inexorably. Alice turned 15, then 16. My visits to their home became a kind of litmus test of their prosperity. Each time, I noticed something new. First, it was a huge curved screen TV mounted on the living room wall.
The old one broke.
Carol said lightheartedly when I involuntarily admired the picture. Then a second car appeared in the driveway, a low, fiery red Mercedes sports car that Robert talked about with boyish enthusiasm.
A dream since my youth, Barbara. I finally allowed myself to buy it.
Meanwhile, requests from the fund flowed to me with enviable regularity, like utility bills. 8,004 SAT prep courses from a leading specialist. 12,004 lessons with an Ivy League admissions consultant. The amounts grew, and the wording became more and more flowery and incomprehensible to me. Once, sitting in their kitchen over a cup of coffee, I cautiously, almost apologetically, asked, "Honey, don't you think all these consultants and courses are a bit too much? Maybe Alice doesn't need all this fuss." Carol looked at me as if I had suggested sending my granddaughter to study in the basement. Her fingers, adorned with a new, dazzling diamond ring, clenched the mug.
Mom, you have no idea how competitive it is out there. We can't let her fall behind. We have to give her the best environment, one that matches the future you've planned for her. Your foundation has set the bar high, and we're just helping Alice reach it.
Her words were coated with flattery, like frosting on a cake, but somewhere deep down I detected a subtle reproach. As if it were my generosity that had created this race they were forced to enter. A sharp, unpleasant pang of guilt stabbed me in the pit of my stomach. I backed off, as always. And then came their vacations. The photos on Carol's trendy refrigerator changed one after another. She and Robert sunbathing on the white beaches of Bora Bora, then skiing in Aspen, then posing in front of the Roman Colosseum. I looked at these pictures and silenced the anxious voice inside me that whispered, with what money? Robert is just a manager. Carol doesn't work. But I immediately pushed these thoughts away. I convinced myself that they must have taken out loans, that Robert had gotten a raise he just hadn't told me about. After all, didn't I want a better life for them? Wasn't it wrong to suspect my own daughter of? No, I couldn't even bring myself to finish that thought. I was a master of self-deception. I was a virtuoso at closing my eyes, covering my ears, and singing myself a lullaby about how wonderful it was that my daughter and son-in-law were working so hard to justify my trust. I tried so hard not to see the truth that in the end I almost stopped noticing it. Almost. Until the day when a single piece of paper tore my cozy, illusion-built world to shreds. Boston. 3 years ago. It was a gray and rainy day, as if the weather itself reflected my mood. I was driving to their house, that chic, spacious mansion in a prestigious suburb, which now seemed to me not a symbol of their success, but a monument to my own stupidity. Alice had failed her final exams. She didn't just get low marks, she failed. She didn't get into any college. My heart ached, not with disappointment, no, but with pity for her. I imagined how she must feel after all these years of preparation and effort. I came to support her, to hug her, to tell her that the world hadn't ended, that we would get through this. Carol met me. Her face was a mask of cold irritation.
She won't leave her room. She doesn't want to see anyone. I don't know what to do with her, Mom. After everything we've done for her.
Her words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I walked silently into the kitchen, that shining temple of modern technology and marble countertops. I needed to do something simple, mundane. Pour some tea. Collect my thoughts. And so I stood at the sink, looking out the window at the rain-soaked, manicured lawn, waiting for the kettle to boil. My gaze wandered aimlessly across the countertop and fell on a pile of unopened mail. Apparently, it had been delivered that morning and left there in the rush. The top sheet caught my eye with its bright logo, a stylized palm tree against a turquoise ocean background. Elite Escape Travel. A receipt. I mechanically read the first few lines. Confirmation of payment. La Barthélemy Hotel, St. Bart's. Villa Prestige. Check-in dates, and then my breath caught in my throat. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. I couldn't believe my eyes. I grabbed the paper and brought it closer, almost burying my nose in it. The payment date. It coincided with the date of my last transfer. The very largest one, $9,500, which I had sent to Carol just a couple of months ago. I remembered that number. I remembered it because that was when I first had doubts.
An intensive course with a math tutor for a year in advance.
That's what Carol said at the time. A year in advance. It seemed strange. But I convinced myself that this was the norm now. That it was an investment. And now this investment lay before me in the form of a receipt for a luxury hotel in the Caribbean. The amount. The same. To the cent. The world around me swam. A hollow ringing in my ears drowned out the sound of the kettle boiling. I leaned against the cold marble countertop, afraid that my legs would give way. Suddenly, at a terrifying speed, other checks, other dates, other amounts began to surface in my mind. A new car. A diamond ring. Their endless vacations. It all came together in one monstrous picture. Not just squandering. Systematic, cynical theft. While Alice was probably struggling with her studies alone, her parents were spending her future on their whims. I stood there, clutching this seemingly innocent piece of paper in my trembling fingers, and felt the last pillar of my life crumble. Faith. And on its ruins, something cold, hard, and merciless rose. Not grief. Not panic. But a clear, steely determination. The kettle was whistling on the stove, but I couldn't hear it anymore. The only sound in my world was the quiet whisper of my own thoughts. That's it. I've had enough. I don't remember how I got home. Rain lashed against the windshield, turning the world into a blurry smudge that perfectly reflected the state of my soul. I drove on autopilot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. There was a deafening roar in my ears, drowning out all other sounds, the whistling of the wind, the noise of the engines, and the insistent voice that kept repeating, "I knew. I always knew." I just didn't want to believe it. Entering my quiet, empty house, I didn't turn on the lights. I threw my keys in their usual place and walked into the living room, sinking into my chair by the window. Twilight enveloped the room in a bluish haze. I sat motionless, and images from the last few years flashed before my inner eye. Not just photos from resorts. No, little things. Thousands of little things. Carol's tone, which became increasingly irritated when I asked about Alice's progress. Her constant,
Everything's fine, Mom, don't worry.
I took it as concern. Robert's gaze, gliding over my modest living room with a slight, barely perceptible condescension. Their new watches, jewelry, endless wardrobe updates, which were written off as good investments or bonuses. And Alice. My poor Alice. Her increasingly rare visits. Her aloofness, which I attributed to adolescence. Her confusion when I asked about those very tutors and courses I had paid for. She just shrugged and looked away. Now I understood. She didn't know what I was talking about. She had been led to believe that all these benefits were thanks to her parents, and that I was just an old grandmother who was out of touch with life, who only criticized and didn't understand anything. A lump of burning bitterness rose in my throat. It wasn't just theft. It was the systematic destruction of my relationship with my granddaughter. They weren't just stealing money. They were stealing my love, my trust, my place in Alice's life. I closed my eyes, and Martin's face appeared before me. His calm, wise eyes. He would never have tolerated such lies. He built our life on honesty and hard work. Every dollar in that fund was filled with his concern for our family's future. And they trampled all that. For some palm trees and villas. Something clicked inside me. Shock and numbness gave way to something else. Cold, heavy, and relentless as granite determination. I got up from my chair, turned on the light, and without a second of hesitation, dialed the number. "Arthur? It's Barbara Mitchell. I need your help. Urgently." The next morning, I was sitting in his office. The sunlight streaming in from the huge window now seemed like a merciless spotlight, illuminating my humiliation. I placed the receipt from the travel agency on his desk. Then I placed a folder with printouts of my translations from the last 5 years. Arthur Davidson, my lawyer and Martin's old friend, looked through the documents. His face remained impassive and professional, but I could see the corners of his mouth tighten.
"Barbara, these are very serious allegations."
"These aren't allegations, Arthur. These are facts." One fact, I poked the ill-fated receipt with my finger. "I need the truth. The whole truth." He nodded, his gaze becoming focused and sharp.
"All right. Then we'll need a private investigator to establish their actual lifestyle and income, and a financial auditor to track all transactions and prove the misuse of the fund's assets."
"Do it," I said, and my voice sounded strange, firm, and unwavering. "I want to know everything. Every penny spent. Every lie." When I left his office, the same autumn wind that had been blowing 3 years ago seemed different to me, not cool, but cleansing. I was no longer a blind, trusting old woman. I had become an investigator, a victim turning into a prosecutor. And for the first time in many years, I felt not pain, but the chilling clarity of the battle ahead. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of nerve-wracking anticipation, during which I jumped at every ring and checked my email 10 times a day. I lived in limbo, between despair and rage, quietly thanking Martin for teaching me to take action rather than mope. And so I was sitting in Arthur Davidson's office again. This time, there wasn't just one pathetic receipt on the table, but 2 heavy envelopes.
"Let's start with the detective's report, Barbara. And be prepared. It's unpleasant."
I opened the folder. And I was in hell. Hell, packed in glossy photographs. Here's Robert coming out of the Porsche dealership with a satisfied grin, patting the hood of the new Cayenne. Here's Carol in a restaurant wearing a mink coat, captioned, "Mrs. Mitchell's new purchase." And here was their joint selfie against the backdrop of the Alps, with the hashtags #GoodLife, #LuxuryLife, #HardWorkPaysOff. Hard work pays off. Yes, my work. My money. Each photo was like a knife to the heart. But that was only the beginning.
And now the auditor's report.
The second folder was thicker. It contained bank statements, cash flow charts, and decrypted documents. My eyes scanned the lines, picking out familiar amounts and dates of my transfers. And opposite them, completely unfamiliar, disgusting payment destinations. $15,000 for tutors, a transfer to a Chanel boutique. $10,000 for a summer program, payment for membership in a country golf club. $8,000 for SAT courses, the bill for their trip to Las Vegas. $12,000 for an admissions consultant payment for the designer renovation of their bedroom. It wasn't just wasteful spending. It was a mockery. They turned every gesture of love and trust one made inside out, turning it into funding for their vulgar, ostentatious luxury. I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. But the worst was yet to come.
Barbara, there's something else. The detective, following your instructions, gathered information about your relationship with your granddaughter.
He took several printed pages out of the folder. They were screenshots of Alice's correspondence with her friend, found in the public domain. My eyes, blurred with tears, could barely make out the lines.
Friend, how's the crazy granny doing?
Alice, oh, Granny. She called again. She's complaining that she hasn't seen me in a long time. She just wants to control everything, as always.
Friend, well, she created that fund to keep you under her thumb.
Alice, I know. Mom says she's just buying her way out because she doesn't know how else to show her love. And she's always dissatisfied with everything. It would be better if she didn't get involved at all.
I recoiled as if I had been slapped in the face. The air rushed out of my lungs with a hiss. That was it. The ultimate betrayal. They didn't just steal money. They stole my granddaughter. For years, they poisoned her soul, turning my love against me. They built a wall of lies and hatred behind which I could no longer see my little girl. I sat there, clutching those papers in my hands, and didn't cry. There were no tears. There was only emptiness, scorched by cold, merciless anger. They didn't just deceive me. They destroyed my family. And for that, they will have to answer. Not as a family. By law. I didn't warn them about my visit. What difference did it make? All the masks had been torn off anyway. I rang the doorbell of their luxurious house, clutching a leather folder that was heavy not with papers, but with the truth it contained. Carol opened the door. Surprise flashed in her eyes, quickly replaced by her usual irritated haste.
Mom? What's going on? We weren't expecting.
We need to talk. My voice was flat and cold. Now. And Robert should join us. I walked into the living room without waiting to be invited and sat down on the sofa. They exchanged glances, sensing trouble, and sat down opposite me, united as always. I placed the folder on the glass table between us. I know everything. I began without preamble. About street farts. About the Porsche. About the fur coat. About all your hard-earned vacations. I opened the folder and slowly, like a weapon, pulled out the photo of the Porsche and the receipt from Chanel. Carol turned pale. Robert frowned, his fingers clenching the armrest of his chair.
Mom, I don't know what you...
Don't lie. My voice broke for the first time that evening, sounding like a whip. I hired a detective. And an auditor. I saw the statements. Every cent I sent for Alice's future, you spent on yourselves. A deathly silence hung in the room. And then something clicked in Carol's eyes. Fear gave way to something else. Anger. Bitterness.
Oh, is that so? Spying on your own daughter? Hiring detectives? That's just like you. You've controlled me my whole life. Not a single step without your approval. Not a single decision. You never believed in me.
She spat it out with such hatred that I recoiled. It wasn't a lie born of fear. It was her truth. A truth she had nurtured within herself for years. That's no excuse for stealing, Carol, I said quietly. This is about Alice's money. Robert joined the conversation. He leaned back in his chair with a victorious look, a contemptuous smirk spreading across his face.
Let's not talk about theft, Barbara. Let's talk about reputation. Yours. Do you really want everyone to know how you spied on your own daughter? How you invaded our privacy? We'll file a counterclaim. For psychological abuse. For pressure.
He paused, letting his words seep into me like poison.
And Alice will be on our side. She'll confirm in court what a tyrant you were. How you tried to manipulate everyone, including through your foundation. Do you want to expose this whole dirty family fight? Ruin her life with this scandal?
I looked at him, at his smug face, and listened to this blatant, brazen blackmail. And at that very moment, when I should have felt fear or despair, I felt the opposite. A legendary, crystal clarity. They weren't just thieves. They were monsters, ready to trample their own daughter just to keep their stolen privileges. I slowly rose from the sofa. I was taller than both of them at that moment. Not physically. Morally. "No, Robert," I said, my voice quiet, but each word falling like a stone. "You were only thinking about your reputation. And you were wrong. You underestimated me." I slammed the folder with the evidence shut. "You want a trial?" I looked straight at Carol, then at Robert. "Fine. You'll get one. But you won't answer to me. You'll answer to the law." I turned and walked to the door, leaving them in their perfect, expensive living room full of lies. And Robert. I turned at the door. "Get ready to pay it all back. Every last cent." I walked out onto the street, and the door slammed behind me with a sound that seemed to bury my past life. A war was coming, and for the first time, I felt ready for it. Silence. After the door of their perfect home slammed shut, my own living room was plunged into a deafening, ringing silence. It pressed on my ears, thickening in the air. I sat in Martin's chair, his favorite leather chair, where even now, it sometimes seems to me, the imprint of his body remains. In my hands was an old, worn photograph. Carol, about 10 years old, with 2 white bows in her hair and a gap-toothed smile of pure happiness. She was hugging our golden retriever, Buddy, and her eyes, clear and bottomless, looked straight at me with unconditional trust. And now, looking at that smile, I finally allowed myself to cry. Quiet, bitter tears ran down my cheeks and fell onto the glass of the photo frame, blurring the face of that other little girl. I wasn't just crying because of the stolen money. I cried for the daughter I had lost many years ago without even realizing it. For the trust that had been trampled on. For all those Sunday dinners, shared holidays, for the us that had crumbled to dust, turning out to be a chimera that covered up their greed. Their words, controlling, tyrant, hung in the air of my home like a poisonous fog. Was I like that? Too strict? Too demanding? Perhaps. And that thought hurt more than any receipt from the travel agency. My tear-blurred gaze fell on another photo on the mantelpiece, Martin and me on our silver wedding anniversary. His hand rested on mine, strong and reliable. He looked at me with such love and respect. He always respected my strength, my mind, my steadfastness. He called it my steel core. And at that moment, it dawned on me. If I gave up now, afraid of scandal, allowing them to blackmail me and keep everything they had stolen, it would not just be a sign of weakness. It would be betrayal. A betrayal of Martin's memory, who spent nights on end on duty at the hospital, who, through his honest labor, drop by drop, created these savings. A betrayal of the principles of honesty and justice on which we built our lives. And, ultimately, a betrayal of the very woman he admired, the woman with the steel core. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. Suddenly, grief and doubt were replaced by a strange, chilling emptiness. An emptiness in which there was no room for anything but determination. I walked over to the phone. My hand was steady. I dialed the number I knew by heart. "Arthur," I said when I heard his voice. Not a single note wavered in my own voice. "This is Barbara. File a lawsuit. For fraud and embezzlement. With all the consequences that entails." I hung up. Silence returned to the house, but now it was different. It wasn't empty, but full. Full of the quiet rumble of the battle ahead. I looked at the photo of young Carol, then at the photo of Martin. I'm sorry, I whispered to my daughter in the photo. But I have to do this. And I turned to face the war. The trial was not a drama, but a surgical operation. Cold, precise, and ruthless. Arthur's lawyer, a woman with the face of an accountant and a piercing gaze, presented the evidence one piece at a time. Every check I had written, every transfer receipt was weighed on the scales of justice, and in response, Carol and Robert's lawyers presented their own bank statements, photographs, and social media posts. It was a monstrous mosaic that formed a picture of such cynical and systematic deception that even the judge sometimes took off his glasses and looked at my relatives with undisguised disgust. The detective's testimony was like hammer blows. He didn't just talk, he demonstrated. A photo of a Porsche. A photo of a fur coat. Printed posts with hashtags about a luxurious life, dated to the days when I was tutoring. But it was the financial auditor who dug the real grave for their defense. With the help of diagrams and color charts, he built an irrefutable chain. Here is the money from Barbara Mitchell's fund that went into Carol and Robert's joint account. And here, a few days later, it went to the accounts of a travel agency, a boutique, and a car dealership. He spoke in a calm, monotonous voice, which made his words sound even more frightening. He turned their lives into columns of numbers, and those numbers screamed of theft. Their lawyers tried to object, talking about family agreements and gifts, but their voices were drowned out by the icy sea of facts. I saw Carol and Robert's faces at the defense table gradually lose their arrogance, turning deathly pale. They saw their wall of lies crumbling, brick by brick. And then, during the break, they gave up. Their lawyer approached Arthur. Quiet, tense negotiations followed. They were making a deal with the prosecution. A full admission of guilt for fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence, probation, but with the obligation to pay full damages. They chose disgrace, but avoided prison. The judge read out the verdict. I won the case. The courtroom erupted, but I could only hear fragments of the noise. I watched Carol's back as she walked away without turning around once. An hour later, I was standing on the granite steps of the courthouse. The sun was shining brightly, and people were rushing through the streets, living their lives. Victory. Bitter, acrid ashes in my mouth. I had won the case, but lost everything. Behind me lay the ruins of my family. A daughter who now hated me. A granddaughter lost to me. I stood completely alone, and the wind blew through the emptiness, as if it were an abandoned house. Arthur put his hand on my shoulder.
Barbara.
I know, Arthur. Thank you. I'm fine. He handed me a folder. Preliminary assessment. What we managed to track down and what is subject to return. About 30,000. The rest, spent. I nodded without looking. The pitiful remains of 250. The ashes of the bonfire on which they burned our past and future. I descended the steps, not feeling them under my feet. Victory. It was heavy and cold, like a block of ice. But inside that block, at its very core, a tiny but solid diamond was already beginning to form, the understanding that justice, however bitter it may be, is more valuable than a comfortable lie. And that now, when everything has collapsed, it is possible to start building again. But only for myself. Several months passed. The bitter ashes that remained on my tongue after the trial gradually washed away. Not the pain, it still aches quietly, familiar as a draft in an old house. But the feeling of emptiness, vast and meaningless, was gone. It was replaced by work. I was sitting in Mr. Davidson's office again. There were different documents on the table now, not lawsuits, but founding documents. Arthur smiled, and his eyes showed not professional courtesy, but sincere respect.
Everything is ready, Barbara. The charter documents for the Dr. Martin Mitchell Scholarship Fund have been approved.
I nodded, running my fingers over the embossed logo on the cover. A stylized caduceus, the symbol of medicine intertwined with an open book. Martin would have approved. The remnants of that first fund, the very 30,000 I had managed to claw back, became the seed. I added to it from my own savings. The sum was not insignificant. Enough to give them a chance.
The first applications are already coming in. From community colleges, from programs for children from disadvantaged areas. You have no idea how important this is to them.
I imagined unfamiliar faces. A boy who might be washing dishes in a restaurant after class to pay for his education. A girl struggling through mountains of textbooks in a tiny apartment crammed with brothers and sisters. They won't feel entitled to demand anything. For them, this opportunity will be a gift. A hard-earned gift, but a gift nonetheless. They will fight for it, cherish every day, every chance. Just like Martin and I once did. We didn't get anything for free. Everything was earned. Built. Suffered for. I signed the documents with a steady hand. No more illusions. No more blind trust. Only clear, transparent rules. Only proven candidates. Only real deals. When I left the office, I didn't go straight home. I went into a small park across the street and sat down on a bench. The sun was shining and the first yellow leaf fell on my knee. I was no longer just Barbara, a deceived mother and grandmother. I became a guardian. A guardian of my husband's legacy. A guardian of opportunities for those who really need them. It was a new beginning. Not a happy or easy one. It was born from the ashes of my old life. But it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, as I watched the children playing in the distance, I felt not the pain of loss, but a quiet, calm confidence. I had found my path, and it led forward. Boston. Present day. The silence of my home was broken by an uncertain ring at the door. I wasn't expecting any visitors. Opening the door, I froze on the threshold. Alice was standing on the steps. She had grown up. Her eyes, so similar to Martin's, showed uncertainty and a new, unfamiliar depth.
Granny, may I come in?
I stepped back silently, letting her in. She walked into the living room, but didn't sit down, as if she didn't feel she had the right to. She turned to me, her hands clasped together.
I've been seeing a psychologist for the last few months. And I've started to understand a lot of things. I was so blind, Granny. Mom and Robert, they spent years telling me that you didn't really love us. That the foundation was just a way to control us. That you were buying us off because you didn't know how else to show your love.
Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't try to wipe them away.
I didn't know about the foundation. I didn't know that you gave all that up for me. I didn't know.
I looked at her, my little girl, who had been stolen from me twice. First by lies, and then by the bitter truth. And I felt neither anger nor triumph. Only endless, weary sadness and that same unchanging love that even years of deception could not kill. I went over and hugged her. She buried her face in my shoulder, as she had done when she was a child, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. I know, baby, I whispered, stroking her hair. I know. It's not your fault. We drank tea in the kitchen. We talked. She told me about her new life, her attempts to find a job, her sessions with a therapist. I listened and nodded. But there was an invisible wall between us, built from years of lies and betrayal. We were polite and cautious, like two diplomats after a long war. We avoided sensitive topics and didn't mention Carol or Robert. The former carefree closeness, the one that existed when she was little and would climb onto my lap to watch cartoons, was gone. And I think it will never return. When she left, kissing me on the cheek with cautious tenderness, I stood by the window, watching her figure dissolve into the twilight. The sunset flooded the sky with crimson, as bright and farewell as everything that remained in my life. I won the battle. I restored justice. I got back what could be gotten back. But the family I dreamed of, was sacrificed. Barbara's final voice, off-screen. Martin said that trust is the most fragile thing in the world. One crack, and it can't be put back together. I learned my lesson. You can only trust those who value you, not your wealth. And sometimes those people are not your blood relatives at all.
Did you like the story? Write in the comments if you have experienced betrayal by those closest to you and how you found the strength to move on. Your experience can help others. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Here we tell sincere stories that make you think and feel. See you next time.